In this video, you will see how an outdoor kitchen can be constructed in just 1 to 2 days using this modular panel system. Here is a 32-inch precast panel. They also come in 48 inches. With these two panel sizes, an infinite number of layouts can be constructed. Here, we're going to use the REACT stain to color the stones on the panels. Each panel is shipped a base gray color, which can be left gray or color to match any color scheme you're looking for. REACT is a reactive stain that works similar to an acid stain, but it's not actually acid. That means there's no neutralizing and no harmful chemicals involved. All of these colors go on purple, but as they react, they start to change the concrete various earth tone colors. Once all the purple is gone, you know the stain's done reacting and the color's permanent. By blotting the stain on heavy and letting it puddle, it's going to create some really nice variations that create looks indistinguishable from natural stone. Here we use 9 different colors and painted each stone with one color. You can always go back over with more stain to darken the colors, or even use different colors to create more variation. There's no need to be very precise with this color. Everything comes out great. Either before, or in this case after staining, it's a good idea to dry fit all the panels together exactly where you're going to have them during assembly. This is going to allow you to figure out where each panel fits together. It's also necessary for cutting the opening for the appliances, as some of the cuts you do will span more than one panel and has to be centered. Here you see the cuts being measured and marked with pencil so that we can cut them out. When you're cutting a panel, we start with using a skill saw with a carbide blade. This is going to cut through the inch or so face of concrete that's on the outside or front of the panel. The panel is then flipped over, the same cutouts marked on the foam side. You can quickly cut through this foam with the same skill saw setup that you used on the front. If the cuts from both sides are not quite deep enough and they meet, just use a reciprocating saw and it's used to cut through the rest of the panel. Here we're cutting the openings for the grill and the door beneath it, as well as the door beneath the sink. These appliances will come with rough opening recommendations in the instructions so that you know what size the cutouts should be. Because of the customizable nature of this system, the appliances really can be placed almost anywhere you want them to. The last step before assembly is to mortar the grout joints. This is optional, but will make your panels look much more realistic. Here we are mixing up some panel patch to a thin slurry which will be brushed into the joints. Use a chip brush to apply the slurry to the joints. This is only done to give the appearance of a real grout joint. Once the slurry is near dry, wipe off the excess slurry with a damp sponge. The first step will be to map the layout with a chalk line, then locate where the rebar pins will fall. Since we're pouring on a concrete pad, we're going to drill a large hole with a masonry bit. Make sure this hole is perfectly vertical. Then hammer your rebar in roughly 2 inches so that 8 to 10 inches are exposed. Here's our layout with the rebar pins installed. Setting the ledger 2x4, we leave it 4 1/4 inches inside that chalk line. 4 for the thickness of the panel, and then 1/4 inch for a little bit of play. You'll see that later. It is possible only to bracket the panels to this ledger board, but in this case we are using the rebar pins to really help lock everything to the lower deck. Conversely, you can do this without the ledger board altogether and just use the brackets that you will see later to go right to your concrete surface. You mix up a batch of common brick mortar, not the panel patch, and place a bed of mortar along the perimeter of the ledger board. Put an inch or two so the sides of the panels will have a good fit and some room for leveling them on top of this bed of mortar. Now you set the first panel, slipping it over the rebar pins, and you'll see each panel will have a pin on one end, and then the other panel will just slide in, lock into place. Takes a little wiggle to get the right fit, and then you're good to go. Then drop a pre-cut length of rebar into the full height, and that keeps the wall supported as you move around this perimeter. Because these panels are precast and the fits can be tight, you may run into some panel intersections that need a little cleaning as you assemble. Wear proper safety equipment, and then a grinder with a diamond blade will do the trick to slightly clean the joint, and they'll fit together a little bit easier. Continue placing the panels until you have all the panels assembled and all of your rods dropped in. Once all the panels are placed, it's time to make sure everything is level and snug together. Sometimes a panel will have to be raised a little bit. Shims do the trick. Just wiggle them underneath, tap them into place, and you're good to go. In the end, your top of your panel should be pretty level between each panel. Now we use those supplied L brackets we spoke of earlier to secure the panels to the base. Place it against both edges and screw it into the base with a wood screw, and then into the panel with another screw, so each panel gets 2 brackets to hold it down to the bottom. Begin placing the cross braces between the panels. Spacing is not set, but you're trying to keep about 18 inches between them. These support your countertop, so you really can't have too many. Make sure that any top-mounted appliances such as grills, burners, and sinks will have enough clearance between your supports. The support should really just flank the outside of those fixtures. Once your supports are set, use a small masonry bit to put a pilot hole in line with the hole of the supports. Then insert a mason screw to secure the support to the top of the panel. If you happen to strip the screw, don't worry about it. It's just going to stop that support from sliding, and it'll all be held down by the countertop. In general, the cement board for this top is cut to fit up to the edge of the panels, even a hair long. To prepare for the installation of the raised bar top, however, we measure to leave a gap of 1.5 inches across the full length of the bar, and then 14 inches up the side. This gap that's left is actually going to be where the supports for this raised bar will be installed later down the road. To fasten the cement board, we pre-drill with an 1/8 inch bit, and we're using a 5/8 inch by number 8 panhead screw. If you plan to ever remove or redo the countertop, silicone caulking can also be used. To measure for the forms, we will start by scribing a line where the back of the form meets the cement board. On an inside corner, you will have to use a straight edge to extend the lines until they meet. The same is done on the outside corner. Now we will have points to measure to when mitering our forms. In most cases, you can hold the form in place and put a mark on it exactly where the cut should fall. Using a compound miter saw with a fine-toothed trim blade, we are easily able to cut our 45-degree angles. The forms are also pre-drilled with an 1/8 inch bit and fastened with a 5/8 inch number 8 panhead screw. Stop when the screw is snug so you do not strip the cement board. You can now see how the mitered corner should meet the mark that we made. We are using the back wall form to make a flush edge with the notched out cement board in order to leave room for the corbels. Here is a look at a unique situation where a small return piece of the square edge runs into the back wall piece. Basically, we just use tape to seal up the gaps. We are also going to use back wall pieces to block out an opening for our grill. A notch is cut on the bottom to allow the back wall form to meet the front of the square edge. The gap will be sealed with tape from the inside of the opening. Notice how the back wall forms are being screwed on the inside of the opening. This will allow us to remove the forms after the concrete is poured. Here we are going to trace and cut the sink opening. We first measure to make sure it is parallel with the edge. Once it is in the proper place, we will scribe a line. Notice the sink form is already attached, so this gives us a rough opening. A Sawzall or jigsaw can be used to cut out the sink opening. Then we trim it up and the sink fits right into place. Screws can be used in the corners next to the sink flange to hold it during the pour. Here we'll use a 2 5/8 inch hole saw to drill a hole for the faucet knockout. Because there will be a raised bar behind the sink, the faucet will go off to the side. To install the knockout, pull it up from under the cement board until it holds firmly into place. Before pouring the top, we are going to drill holes in the cement board that are over those holes in the panel joints. Then we will use a grout bag to pipe some mortar into these joints, locking everything together. Now we're going to mix up some more of that panel patch we used earlier, but this time it's just a little bit thicker and more like mortar. Why? Because we're going to use the tuck point where the panels come together. It cures out to be the same color as the panels and the same color as that slurry mix we used before to touch up our joints after staining. As soon as the joints start to firm up a little bit, again you can take your sponge and clean off that joint. Here we are using our FG50 fiberglass mesh reinforcement and Z-clip system. Start by rolling out the mesh and cutting it to the correct size. We will hold the mesh using the Z-clips placed roughly every 1 square foot. This will keep the reinforcement at the proper height when pouring the concrete. On this pour, we will be using our rock face form liner to give the look of a chiseled edge. We will mark the cuts with a marker and then miter them with a utility knife or a miter saw. To hold them in place, we will first clean the backs with denatured alcohol. This allows our double-sided polyester mounting tape to stick very well. Then it is as easy as pulling the back off the tape and pressing the form liner against the inside square edge form. If you have any gaps or the form liners don't match up well at the seams, a small amount of plumber's putty can be used to address these areas. Now it's time for concrete. The product we used here is called Z-Liquicrete. It's a high-performance ad pack that blends with a common sand topping mix that you get locally, and it creates a nice creamy mix that flows and levels easily and then cures out by the next day. For a full tutorial on mixing and pouring the Z-Liquicrete, please see our video titled How to Mix, Pour, and Finish Z-Liquicrete. You're going to start at one end, fill batch by batch until you reach the other end of your countertop. You're going to screed as you go to keep a nice level surface. Don't forget to vibrate the edge to remove any trapped air pockets. Here you see our vibroblade attachment on a multi-purpose tool. This will help remove unwanted bug holes. Once that top starts to dry out, you're going to use a mag float to work that surface and give you a good creamy layer on top that's going to allow you a great finish. Now after waiting a half hour to a couple hours depending on conditions, the surface is going to lose its shine and then it stiffens up quite a bit more. And then it's going to be time to do a steel trowel that's going to give you a very smooth surface. If it's still a little bit too wet, just stop and come back a little later. The right time to steel trowel is a pretty stiff surface, no water on top, and the steel trowel will just kind of glide over, smoothing out and almost giving a glaze on top when you're finished. It is now the second day and time to lay out the raised bar. The corbels are temporarily set in place so we can set the filler blocks. In this case, we will be notching the blocks out to fit around the corbel, but they can also be cut to fit directly in between. To cut the blocks, we will use a skill saw and an angle grinder. Now you will see how it all fits together. Mix up another batch of mortar like you did when we set the panels on the ground and begin setting your blocks and corbels. You're going to use about a 1-inch bed of mortar so that when they're locked into place, you're going to be left with about a 1/2 inch joint that matches the rest of the panel system. You may have noticed the wall ties that were screwed into the cement board and protruding through the lower countertop. These will go through the holes in the corbel, which will be filled with mortar, locking everything together. You notice how the middle corbels protrude out a bit further. This is by design, since the raised bar will have a slight curve along the front edge. Notice the difference in the color of the mortar. The one on the right is typical Type S mortar. The one on the left is the panel patch. This should be used in all visible joints, so it will match the color of the existing grout lines. Don't forget to touch up and tuck point all visible joints with panel patch for a more finished look. This bar is also going to feature a footrest. The placement of the 5 lugs was carefully laid out under the corbels. Now we mortar them into place. Since these are exposed joints, we will use the panel patch mix. Don't forget to level each lug so the footrest lays flat. For this particular project, and sake of class time, this 600-pound bar was precast to the head and placed on top of the corbels in a bed of mortar. This can certainly be done cast in place using the Z-form system, just as you did with the lower bar. More final details are completed, and then the small precast footrest, precasted just like the bar, is placed. Now it's time to reveal our edge. Starting at a corner, simply bend them out gently until you have a little wiggle room. Then continue to bend them down past the halfway point until they eventually snap off, revealing that perfect concrete edge. Here we are using a gem pad to touch up the corner so there are no sharp edges that can chip. You can still see how fresh the concrete is by the dark color. This indicates a lot of moisture is still present. This makes the sanding easy, but means we still have to wait a few days until we can stain and seal. The cement board is now cut out for the appliances. Appliances are dry fitted. Some trimming of the opening is very common, and just use your concrete blade a little at a time till your appliances fit in nice and smooth. Doors and trim are attached and screwed into the panels depending on your setup. Plumbing for the faucet is connected. The sink plug used allows room for adjusting this faucet. And finally, the stainless steel door beneath the sink. This will give us storage space and access to hook up the plumbing. The time lapse shows what can be achieved over the course of just 1 to 2 days. Time is money, and this system creates a beautiful and completely customizable product in the shortest amount of time possible.